It's the Enforcement Committee meeting of the Contractors State License Board. I'm Bob Lamb, the Enforcement Chair. Will the April 27, 2015 meeting of the Contractors State License Enforcement Committee come to order? Only board members who are members of the committee may sit at the table. Other board members who are in attendance must observe from the audience. If a quorum of the board is present, those members who are observing cannot participate in the discussion, even though they sorely want to. Every year, CSLB surveys consumers on how satisfied they are with CSLB's complaint handling. 7 out of 8 satisfaction categories are up from 2013. 82% of complaints maintained they were courteously treated by CSLB representatives in 2013-2014. I'll let Deputy Chief Christina Delp go into further detail later. However, I would like to congratulate the Enforcement Division staff for a job well done. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, I send guys all in the Enforcement Division emails about how much I appreciate what you do, and that's absolute proof positive. Thank you so much. I mean, I know I've worked in customer service before, and that's basically what it is, and I understand the challenges, and you have stepped up and met them, and I truly, on behalf of this committee, and I'm sure I speak for the whole board, would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart, because I think it's absolutely fantastic to be able to get that done, and done every day, all day, day in, day out, week after week. So thank you very much.
That's it, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll give you that 20 later. Every year, CSLB surveys consumers on how satisfied they are. Oops, I already read that. I'm happy to learn that our Public Works unit is continuing to work closely with our partnering agencies, specifically with the Labor Commissioner's Office to address employee wage theft and the new Public Works registration program. Enforcement staff, in coordination with the Monterey District Attorney, has scheduled a conference for June 12, 2015 in Castroville to explore criminal prosecution strategies with industry leaders representing electrical, heating and air conditioning, and roofing contractors. Presenters from the Monterey DA, Department of Insurance, and CSLB will develop best practices for enforcement of license and insurance requirements. I want to thank Board Chair David Diaz for securing the meeting location, and would be remiss if I did not mention Mr. Diaz has previously provided CSLB training locations in Santa Clara and San Leandro. And seeing as he's board chair, I just want to say he's an all-around good guy. Agenda item B, public comment section. This item is provided for public comment pertaining to items on the agenda as well as items not on the agenda. However, the committee cannot take any action on items not listed on the agenda. Remember that. Are there any individuals who wish to address the committee at this time? Is there public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item C, enforcement program update. Chief David Folt will now provide the enforcement program update.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. On page 91 at the top, we have what is, I believe, a record settlement. We were able to help a subcontractor receive $2.2 million. Majority of the settlements that we achieve are anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000, and we'll be including a footnote in future reports that we won't be including this in our overall savings to the public. But I did want to mention that our Intake Mediation Center staff continue to be very effective in resolving complaints. The second highlight is we included this to give you an update of the trends that we're seeing. It relates to solar industry complaints. We're receiving complaints that are very troubling because we have evidence of lending fraud. We have situations where the contractor is not licensed, or the salespersons around negotiating these contracts are not licensed. And the third element that's present is the consumers are believing they're going to achieve a greater reduction on their electricity bill than they are. And so we're having to put together a comprehensive enforcement strategy to handle this. Christina Delp is taking the lead on it's kind of like a modified or a task force to address these issues, and we'll be reporting back to the board at future meetings as to our success. We do have a major criminal filing in Southern California. It's not been filed yet, but we've made the referral, and we're hopeful that the case will be filed within the next 60 days. The third highlight we included because it shows how dedicated staff are in trying to help the parties resolve matters without having to go civilly, having to hire an attorney. And it's a good example of how that can be achieved, where you have a disagreement over a change order, parties can no longer work together. Can we resolve it? Can we get restitution to the consumer? and perhaps have another contractor complete the job, and everybody moves forward. On the following page, this page 92, we highlighted an 88-year-old Sunnyvale widow that had been victimized over a sewer line replacement by an unlicensed contractor named Frank Gudera. And what I thought was real interesting is when we followed up last week as to the status of this, what we found is that the second complaint, the second victim that's included in this statute, had suffered an extreme loss, and it was quite interesting, and that this elderly consumer agreed to pay $1,000 a day in cash, purchased $18,000 worth of material that we don't believe were even used on the job, and paid off the balance on his motorcycle loan. Bob Lamb, I believe, has a Harley Davidson. He might.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, but $16,000 balance on the motorcycle loan. Agreed to, was supposed to repay it, but of course that repayment was not made. We did add that case to the first filing, first criminal filing. Mr. Gudera was supposed to appear on April the 10th. He did not show. His bail, his $30,000 bail has been forfeited, and he now has a $75,000 bench warrant for his arrest. On page 93, I want to update the committee on our success with our Public Works unit. And what you'll see is that in 2014, 239 investigations were performed. That's a 68% increase over 2013. 94 of those investigations resulted in formal disciplinary action, with a number of them referred to prosecutors. And the unit is comprised of 2 full-time investigators. One is with us today. That's Rebecca Like. And I wanted to point out Rebecca because not only has she done a great job handling these cases and working with industry partners, but she's taken a lead role working with our Public Affairs Office in scheduling registration training tomorrow in this building. There's, as I understand, 100 confirmed that'll be here. This room will be packed. And we've got another 250 that are registered for the webinar. So Rebecca did a great job. Melissa Huckabee is the other full-time investigator. The 2 of them, the work they've done has been extremely impressive, and I thank them for that. On page 97, at the bottom, we highlighted Patrick Murphy, unlicensed contractor, misrepresenting the work that needed to be done targeting elderly victims. And he did receive a 12-year prison sentence. Our peace officer, Joseph Martinez, took a lead role in putting that case together. And it's an example, though, of what we can do when we're effective with our investigations and work closely with prosecutors. Another investigation, though, that you're aware of, that I think it was probably 6-8 months ago, the board directed enforcement to establish a service and repair task force. And that task force has been very successful in identifying the different types of crimes that are being committed on consumers. And what we're finding, though, which we didn't expect, is that many of these crimes are occurring because of telemarketing. You have situations where we have these telemarketing firms, or we can call them boiler rooms, but you've got anywhere from 10 to 25 people that are calling all day. The calls are going out. They're trying to schedule some type of minor work of improvement or a cleaning, like a duct cleaning or a tune-up, something relatively minor. The ruse is to get in the front door and then upsell the project. And there's really limited recourse for the consumer because when you call the number back, you don't get an answer. Now, this time I'd like for Hugh Henderson, Hugh, to take the podium. Hugh's one of our peace officers, and he's taken it upon himself to identify additional victims. He's also been a leader in the Service and Repair Task Force.
Good morning. As Chief Thoet alluded to, my name is Hugh Henderson. I've been serving as a peace officer for 7 years, first as a youth correctional counselor and then a correctional officer with CDCR. And effective 1 October of 2014, became employed by CSLB as a peace officer investigator. So I volunteered for this assignment to the Service and Repair Task Force that was established in September 2014. I began investigating consumer complaints. I might want to add that many of those complaints had already been opened, investigated, and closed for insufficient evidence. It's important to note. And while I can discuss probably many different complaints with you, I want to just highlight one in particular. in which I'm investigating an elderly woman in Granada Hills. She's 86. She paid over $1,500 for air duct cleaning. And that mushroomed or morphed into 4 additional contracts that she signed. She eventually paid over $204,000 for these 4 different contracts, and had her bank not notified her son, who is appointed as the attorney in fact for her, and placed stop payments on those checks, the financial injury would have been far worse for her. And industry experts subsequently went out to the job site and determined the value of work was $70,000. So as the chief alluded to, this elderly victim is just one of many numerous consumers that have fallen victim to telemarketing calls for duct cleaning or other minor work that's simply a ruse to gain access into the home and sell them unnecessary products or services at exorbitant prices. So a few months ago, we served search warrants on financial institutions, identified additional victims, as well as the persons receiving the ill-gotten gains from this criminal activity. At that time, I determined that the consumer filed complaints demonstrated just a small fraction of the criminal activity that was occurring because the search warrants produced literally hundreds of checks that were issued by victims throughout the state. So although I'm based in Sacramento, my assigned task force area is the greater Los Angeles Basin. And after we identified these additional consumers, I consulted with Chief Vogt and received approval to begin contacting these homeowners whose phone numbers were listed on their checks and are identified as the LA area victims. And it was apparent in the very initial calls I made that many of these consumers who had issued the checks were elderly, apprehensive, defensive, angry, embarrassed, a full range of emotions, which was a challenge in and of itself to develop a strategy to quickly identify myself and who I was and to let them know that I was there to protect their interests and to serve their interests. And I considered myself to be fairly successful in that endeavor. I did contact 39 consumers. I had 23 who were willing to move forward. Unfortunately, some were deceased. Some were not able to be contacted. Some I left messages with and did not return calls. But 23 are moving forward. All 23 are elderly. And when I say elderly, I just want to specify here that the penal code requirement is 65 to be categorized or considered as elder abuse. These elders were substantially beyond that, well into their 70s, early 80s. I even spoke with a woman who's 92, who did not have a clue that she wrote a check for $8,200 to anybody. Did not recognize the name of the company she wrote the check to. Didn't know what services were performed. Didn't know anything about the check. Had no family in the area, and was completely clueless. That's just an example of what we're encountering out there, and I'm very confident as we proceed forward with these investigations, I'm going to be able to secure the cooperation of at least one consumer victim who's willing to go on camera in an effort to help protect others from experiencing a similar fate. And I want to close by thanking you as a committee for your commitment to establishing this criminal investigation task force, and I can say with confidence that you can anticipate additional criminal filings in the next 60 days and ultimately criminal prosecution for the perpetrators. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Hugh. And if we turn to page, I guess, 98, we have an update regarding the Labor Enforcement Task Force and our success in identifying more than 40% of the contractors on site as being in violation of a state law. Generally, that's going to be a license, workers' comp, or a tax withholding requirement. At the bottom of the page, we've included our statistics, and they follow by line charts with a summary of what we're tracking. What I wanted to point out is approximately 2 weeks ago, I was able to meet with the California State Law Enforcement Association. That's the union that represents our investigators. And one of the topics was how we track employee production. And they were extremely impressed with these charts and the way the board has supported a weighted average. They believe it could be a model for other boards and bureaus because what it does is it takes into account the time off the employee may have. Generally, if they're off more than a week, they're going to be factored at 0.75 rather than 0.1. If they've been off for an extensive period of time for training, that factors in. And also, if they're working extremely difficult cases, they may not have to, the goal for them may not be closing 10 per month. It could be less at the supervisor's discretion. For those working the very difficult cases, generally that's going to be 5 per month. So it's been, this report has continued to develop. I'd like to thank Heather Young, the analyst, for putting these stats together in the weighted average, and also our registrar, Cindy Christensen, for her idea with the line charts and the summary. And that would conclude the enforcement update. Be happy to answer any questions.
Is there any public comment on this issue, on this item? I'm sorry. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item D, review, discussion, and possible action regarding 2015-2016 enforcement strategic plan objectives. Dave and Deputy Chief Christina Delp will now update the committee on the strategic objectives.
Yes, on page 107, the first proposed objective is to establish government accounts to obtain court records. And you should have in front of you a printout from the Sacramento County Superior Court website. And the reason why this is important is a couple of years ago, the board directed staff to further develop relationships with local prosecutors, to refer more cases to local prosecutors for criminal prosecution. And as evidenced by our first 7 months of reporting this fiscal year, we've had, I believe it was almost close to 800 legal actions. Over 300 of those were consumer-filed legal actions that were referred to DAs. These are complaints that consumers referred. We also know we've got another 600-700 a year that our proactive enforcement staff refer to DAs. The problem we've had in the last year or so is that we can no longer track our referrals without paying for them. It may seem kind of odd, but we don't have a mechanism in place where we can access our court records, where we can determine the status of our filing. This is posing a huge problem for 2 reasons. One, my good friend Rick Lopes in the back, he gets extremely upset with me when he reads about a criminal conviction in the paper or the news clips. We didn't know it was going to happen. But also, we need to be tracking this referral because we can often get the license revoked from the bench. So just to put this in like a dollars and cents approach, by saving $5 and not being able to access the court records, we could be spending $10,000. It's a poor business practice that needs to be fixed, and I'm hoping with the board's support we'll be able to find a solution. The solution could be that General Services would allow us to use some type of a credit card to access the court records, or we need to get checks and set up accounts. But we need to do something. As it stands today, what happens, if we need it for a board packet or for some other reason, we'll have somebody, one of the staff has to use their credit card, and they could arguably put it on a paper claim to get reimbursed, but for the most part, they're just paying out of pocket. But we got to do a better job tracking our referrals. Something we implemented maybe 6 months ago was when we have a consumer case that we've referred to a DA and felony charges have been filed, we make a copy of that investigative report, and we're tracking that case so that we can get some press out of it upon conviction. But for us, it's extremely important that we resolve this issue. And the second objective would be to redefine or to take a look at our proactive strategies, how we're responding to leads. And if you were to look at the charts that we had, the statistical charts that are in the packet, you'll see that our SWIFT team are performing at a very high level. They're achieving their goal of more than 13 closures with approximately 50% to legal action. That's very impressive. But what I would like to take a look at is when we do take a legal action, would we be better served with some of our partnering cases to refer those to DAs? I think that needs to be addressed. We also need to look at our success when we're out individually without our state agency partners performing sweeps. The reality is when we're doing a sweep by ourselves, our success rate in finding a violating contractor is less than 20%. So that's the kind of thing I'd like to put together, an issue paper, come back to the board, and get the board's input on whether we're using our proactive resources as effectively as we can. And for 3 and 4, I'll turn it over to Christina.
So for enforcement objective number 3, it's the revision of the enforcement manual. And as you know, with any organization, they should periodically review and update their processing procedures. So we have preliminarily established people who would be part of focus groups that would look at all the programs within enforcement and move forward to updating those complaint handling procedures by the end of the year. Also for enforcement objective number 4, to update regulation for assessment of civil penalties. We're seeking the board's approval to look at Board Regulation 844, specifically the range of the civil penalty assessment and determining factors used to determine the assessment amount. Enforcement would like to review which violations may warrant an increase in the minimum and maximum penalty amounts. For example, there's B&P Code 7125.4, which pertains to filing false exemptions for workers' compensation or the employment of workers without having workers' compensation insurance, and that carries a minimum civil penalty of only $200. We feel that this may be on the low side, and it's not an effective deterrent for this unlawful activity. So, of course, we will seek industry's input and also work with Chief of Legislation Laura Zuniga to move forward in developing regulations to look at that. That's it.
Okay, now I'd like to ask the committee if they would like to include any other objectives. Seeing none, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, Pastor. I apologize, Pastor. Turn on your mic.
I'm sorry. First of all, I want to thank staff for putting consecutive numbers on the report, the packet. It's really great to be able to follow it. It's really, really a nice item. And thank you. That was one of our strategic objectives last year, right? But anyway, when I look at these strategic objectives, I think of them in terms of strategic objectives and operational objectives. And I think the objectives listed here, they really are strategic to the extent that it's really going to take the organization to the next level. And I think that's what I really like to see in developing these type of objectives. One comment, as far as your target date, you may want to extend it a little bit further because, for example, in the first one, you're going to do it in 3 months, and usually that you may want to look at that possibility. And even the others, you have December. It gives you 6 months to really do a very, very, I think, to do a comprehensive study or do a comprehensive revisiting guidelines. I think you're going to need a little bit more time. That's just a comment. And I think you mentioned a solar initiative that you're beginning. I will tell you one thing. In my participation at the Senior Scam Stopper seminars, the issue of robocalling is, that's a question we always get. And who are the robocallers? Are the solar industry. So I really think that is, I don't know if you wanted to make it part of number 2, or at least consider that as part of number 2, or put that as something to look at as far as that objective. It might be a good thing. And the other thing in your report, you mentioned the initiative where you're moving forward with your public works initiative. I saw an opportunity here you have an objective already that you're going to be working with the Labor Commissioner's Office. You have an objective, and you have your performance measures already listed, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I don't know if staff feels or Cindy feels that maybe that would be another objective you might consider as part of your packet. That's my comments.
Okay. I think David's writing them down here for you, Pastor, and take those under advisement. I definitely agree with you wholeheartedly on the solar.
I would recommend the committee consider amending the first enforcement objective to indicate researching criminal records, fee exemptions for government agencies, or in the alternative, establishing an account, because in the handout that the staff have provided for the Sacramento County Superior Court, it says members of governmental entities within California may use the system for free.
Yep.
So I just think
nice.
I would like the authority to work with staff to see if there's a way for us to get that implemented. I'm not sure why the staff's having trouble accessing records, but that's a common exemption for state and county, is there's an exemption or a waiver for government agencies to access the records for free. So if you could amend the objective to indicate in the alternative both researching the free or the fee exemptions for government agencies or establishing an account, because if there's some reason why there's inconsistencies perhaps across counties in this area, then I understand the need to establish an account, but I would recommend first researching whether we can get them for free
Yeah, I
and
believe
how to
that's,
do that.
I'm sure that would be part of it.
Okay.
Because it's something the staff's going to be working on. And that's great input, though. Absolutely, if we get it for free, I'm
Yeah.
all about that. That's good. That's great. Okay, are there any other comments or objectives anybody would like to add?
I moved passage of adoption of these strategic plans for presentation of the board.
Second.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second to approve these and present to the board with, I'm sure that some of the other issues that Pastor brought up, we can implement those as well. That's okay with the maker of the motion and the second?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Yeah, we need to call a roll. It's a roll vote.
Bob Lamb,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese,
Aye.
Pastor Herrera,
Aye.
Frank Shetter,
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item E. Christina, will you please summarize the survey findings? Oh, I'm sorry. Review and discussion regarding consumer satisfaction survey. Christina, would you please summarize the survey findings? I know they're good.
Yeah.
And
They're excellent.
I'm sorry I fumbled that one, but
That's okay.
I know you'll make up for it.
So the Consumer Satisfaction Survey, just for a little bit of background, in 1994, CSLB began soliciting feedback from individuals who had filed complaints with the board. The purpose of this survey is to benchmark ongoing enforcement program evaluation, as well as identify areas that need improvement. Originally, I guess back before 2010, people used to receive postcards, but we have moved to sending people who we actually have an email address on file who have a closed complaint. We now send them a Survey Monkey through an email address, and those who receive the Consumer Service Satisfaction Report. And on table 1, on page 113, summarizes the survey. There's 8 questions that are asked of the individuals, and in all 8 categories, we showed an increase of anywhere from 1% to 6% in 2013, with the highest category showing that individuals were treated courteously by CSLB representatives, which is outstanding effort on CSLB's part. Since 2000, the survey began to tabulate the number of also consumers who inquire that if their contractor is qualified, and in 2000, 29% checked CSLB's license status, and in 2014, we've seen an increase to 41%. So that's also a great increase of people checking the license. We feel we attribute the success to this continuous training that we provide to staff, and I just want to touch base that our last enforcement committee, Pastor Herrera mentioned about the training that we provide to our consumer services representatives. So I want to just mention that our CSRs do receive time management training and how to deal with difficult people. They receive that from our solid training facility through DCA, and then they also get continuous training that's specialized through our trainers Doug Galbraith and Mike Franklin. And then we're also looking to do specialized training for them in learning more about the components with solar and HVAC industries. So in summary, the survey shows outstanding efforts by all enforcement staff in resolving consumer complaints.
Okay, thank you, Christina. Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll move to agenda item F, review, discussion, and possible action regarding proposed changes to minimum CSLB peace officer training standards. It's come to my attention that we're having problems retaining and recruiting peace officers. Dave, would you please explain to the board the current minimum requirements and the challenges you're facing?
Through the chair, Bob, can I ask a couple quick questions back on the consumer survey?
sure,
I'm
Dan,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
Just one thing that I did note is that, and I don't know if I'm reading this right, but 82% of the complaints, this is on page 131, were dealing with contracts $2,000 or less. But we have financial injury 75% at $30,000 or more. Am I didn't know how to interpret that.
You're talking about the complaint profiles?
Yeah, so if you look at page 131, if I'm reading this right, 82% of the complaints that came in had to deal with a contract that was $2,000 or less?
Yes,
that-
and I'm going to do my best to explain it, so, because testing is the division that actually puts the survey out, but I believe that they wanted to keep the, it is, I guess, not as like biased as it could possibly be, so they developed these complaint profiles, and this is what this is showing, that of, they look at the people who have email addresses, and they categorize here the percentage of people who had, like, say, 2,000 and less in a contract, and then they compare who actually responded back, and so it's showing you that of 84% that fell in that category, 81% actually met that benchmark, so it's trying to show you that there's really not a bias in these categories. That make sense?
So it's really not all of them 2,000?
Well, I think it's unfortunate somebody's not here from testing, because we rarely receive complaints where the contract price is less than $2,000. Where you would see that occurring, though, is because the consumer did not put in the contract amount. So that could be part of it. But if that's what this is asking, is the contract price less than $2,000, it's a rare case that we would see something like that once you've actually investigated. So that might be a situation where our system's not being updated once we determine what the contract price was. Yes.
Oh, Pastor.
So, you know, on page 134, closing actions, and the second item listed is insufficient evidence, which is 16%. I mean, it seems to me that that's, well, it's high, I would think, where, you know, I guess the consumer is not providing enough evidence to really justify the complaint. Maybe there's need to go back and see what those cases, or what the issue was there. Maybe they didn't have a signed contract, or I don't know, maybe it was a verbal contract or whatever. But I thought that was pretty significant. And then there was another one here, no jurisdiction, 4%. So what happens there? Are those people just said, go file in small claims court, they referred to somewhere else, or, and I don't know if you had that information.
Well, you know, I do. And
Okay.
when a consumer takes the time to file a complaint, it's not uncommon that they're filing a complaint that may be questionable as to whether it's under CSLB jurisdiction. And one thing we're very reluctant to do is to send, let me just back up for a second. When we receive a complaint, both parties receive an initial contact letter, and they receive another letter throughout the process. Upon closing the complaint, if the contractor's licensed, closing letters go out. And we are reluctant to use the CL40, the no violation. Even though someone may have filed a complaint here and it doesn't clearly fall under our jurisdiction, perhaps it falls under the Structural Pest Control Board, or it's something that it's a secondary damage and they should be contacting their insurance company, we would close that case out as a CL20, insufficient evidence to support a violation. And the reason why we do that is because we found that the consumers take that a lot better than having a letter going out to their contractor saying there's no violation, you shouldn't have filed a complaint. And then you get into that situation as to whether or not you have a consumer that is in some way damaged somebody's business. And so strategically, we use the L2 because it just, all this means to us is we don't have sufficient evidence at this time to support a formal administrative action.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? All right, I'm going to continue on with agenda item F. Dave?
In 2011, CSLB received approval for 9 additional peace officer positions, and at about that time, the board adopted a minimum training requirement whereby they would have to complete at least the 17-week basic post-academy that's offered by Golden West College. It's an academy that's specific to state investigators. There's some discussion as to whether that academy is going to continue or not. We have peace officers that we've hired that have been through the regular post-academy, which is, I believe, 25 weeks, what's put on by the sheriff and other law enforcement. We've also had peace officers that have gone through correctional officer academies and other academies that qualify them to become a state peace officer. But for CSLB's purposes, all that is required is that they complete what's known as Penal Code 832. It's a 64-hour course that most of our enforcement staff have taken. Now, what we have discovered in the last 2 or 3 years is that we're having a very difficult time competing against other state agencies and local law enforcement. The reality here at the Contractors Board is that we have our own series for our investigators. It's the Enforcement Representative Series. Department of Insurance, Division of Investigation, other regulatory bodies, they're part of the Investigator Series. There was a time when we thought we could be part of the Investigator Series. It's important to note that because they're paid approximately 7% more. Now, once someone's gone through an academy, we teach them here to become good detectives. Hugh Henderson's a great example of that. You know, Hugh's got a passion for the job, and I'm so glad you're still working for us, because the reality is Hugh's had opportunities to make more money. We're hoping you stay, Hugh. So, no pressure.
You're our poster child.
But I had a deputy DA down in Southern California telling me that you really should consider this investigator's enforcement rep for a peace officer job. But as soon as she gets out, I'm going to hire her. I'm going to pay her $120,000 a year. So that's about twice what she can make working for us. So our business model, it doesn't appear to be sustainable at this time. And we've lost, or we're in the process of losing, 6 out of our 11 peace officers who are leaving for much higher paying jobs. So what I'm asking the committee to consider is relaxing that requirement that they take at least a 17-week course and provide for the appointment of an enforcement rep or someone that's duly qualified to be appointed as a peace officer upon completion of the comprehensive background check and the completion of PC 832.
I just want to point out, too, that in changing these requirements or the perceived perception, it may lead to labor issues, and we have brought it forward to both our personnel office and the labor officer at Consumer Affairs, and they've agreed that we did not have to do any meet and confer with this.
If I could just add to that one, Nicole A. is our personnel manager. When Nicole and I had the opportunity to meet with the California State Law Enforcement Association, we did bring this up. It wasn't an official meet and confer, but they did support this approach because they realize how difficult it is for us to retain our peace officers. And other state agencies are having the same problem, even though they pay more.
David, can you explain to the committee what is going to have to happen if we have a peace officer that hasn't taken the arrest portion of this and isn't carrying a firearm, things like that, how we're going to deal with that?
Well, there's 2 things that will occur if this approach is adopted. One, a lot of our internal staff are going to be competing for these peace officer jobs, which they haven't before because they've not wanted to take the 17-week academy. So it's going to expand our pool of qualified candidates. That's a real positive. The downside, though, is I don't believe that we'd ever be able to sponsor legislation or to arm them without taking the 17-week course. That's going to be a minimum requirement. That's something that the board could look at down the road. But those are the 2 issues we're faced with here. One, it's the fact that we can't compete for salary, and 2, they're not armed. And when you have a lot of vacancies at the Division of Investigation, of course, that's the law enforcement arm for the Department of Consumer Affairs, they can go there and they can get themselves a pay increase and they can carry a firearm. And so that's very enticing to our peace officers. But that is what the board is being asked to consider.
And then also at stings and things, when they'd have to have an armed officer there, we always have local PD or
Yes.
DAs there that are armed.
If it's okay with the committee, I'd like for John Bruce, he's the supervisor of our Special Investigations Unit. He supervises the peace officers. Because we're not part of the investigative series, he's not able to be appointed as a supervisor peace officer. But he did make some calls to local law enforcement. And John, would you want to just quickly perhaps brief the board on that, on what you found out? And the reason I asked John to make the calls is I was wondering if we would need to contract with local law enforcement to back us up at stings. Because as it stands today, we don't have our peace officers providing backup at stings because they're not armed. The way we've used our peace officers is on elder abuse investigations and criminal investigations. So our focus has been on the investigative part of it and not so much on the arrest part of it.
That's true. With the arrests, we have transportation issues as well as just security at the scene down there. So we kind of refrain from actually making arrests. We leave that for our backup units. And I checked that just Friday. I was calling around to see what that was going to cost us. And so far, the only agency that's charging us would be the CHP. I've got other calls in that are supposed to respond to that, so it might be some more. But right now, CHP requires a services contract that they're going to be prepared and send that to us so we can take a look at that. But we got 3 agencies that I was able to make positive contact with. That was the El Dorado County DA's office and Yolo County and Sutter. They work kind of together. And as far as backup, and we also have Amador County. These agencies will back us up with prior notice. If we're going to set a sting operation up, just to give them a call ahead of time, and they'll make arrangements there. And we've got several other agencies we're waiting for callbacks on, but hopefully we're going to be setting these things up where they're going to partner with us. They already do, and I think our SWIFT unit has a lot of contacts there. We're trying to set the same thing up in special investigations, so we'll have pre-op operational meetings with them and making contacts, giving them a little heads up. And if we give them ample time, they're willing to meet us out there and stick with us. But it entails, most of the sting operations would entail a full day, and determining on what operation we have, that would help them account to how many officers they're going to need to back us up on that thing. But they are armed, and a lot of the agencies I contacted, they kind of have an issue with the CSLB peace officers not being armed. So when we talk to them, they want to know whether or not they're armed. So we have to let them know that our officers are not armed, but they will come back and they'll present ample manpower then and stand us as our security and backup at that time. But right now, I've only got about 4 that we've talked to, and there's several others we're waiting for callbacks. I'll follow up on them this week.
So John, to summarize, we're able to do at least 1 sting a week, and we have a lot of law enforcement partners that are readily available to back us up and have been for a number of years. In the event, though, that wasn't to be available to us, we may want to enter into a contract with the California Highway Patrol, and they could provide backup.
True.
There would be a cost to doing that. I know we've done in the past.
That's true. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, yeah, go ahead. You're done? Kevin, go ahead.
Just, I come from the private sector, and I know we have different rules and constraints. If we do this, what's going to keep the new peace officers from going? I mean, don't we have a structural problem here more than we do a training problem, I guess is my first comment. My second question is does the CSLB pay the new peace officer under this program to go to the 17-week class? And I'll leave it at that.
Yes, we do pay for them to go. We cover their salary and we cover their per diem, which is approximately, I believe, $27,000. I'll just tell you an example, though, of something that happened in Southern California. We had a tremendous investigator, did a lot of criminal cases before he was selected as a peace officer. He graduated out of the Golden West Academy as a president of his class. As soon as he graduated, what did he do? He now works for Mike Gomez, the Division of Investigation. So the difference, though, with this change is they would not have completed that 17-week course. Another state agency could still hire them as a peace officer, but if it's a state agency that arms their peace officers, they're going to have to put them through. We had a supervisor, no less, that went through the San Diego Police Academy, and She did a great job. She made a lot of contacts. As soon as she got out, where is she today? She's a San Diego police officer. So they can still do that, but they would have to be the ones putting them through the academy.
So,
Oh, I'm-
yeah, I'm just gonna say, make a comment, it's the money-saving thing we're trying to do here.
Absolutely, but I think, I mean, and I've heard this, under the prior leadership, I mean, we have vacancies that are structural vacancies in the Bay Area, for example, where I am. And, to the extent, I don't know, as a state agency, what we can or can't do with the personnel rules and whatnot, but we need to be able to provide our people with a reasonable wage and that's competitive in the marketplace, and to do that. Otherwise, to keep changing it, and I certainly would not expect that we're reducing our standards here. I understand the formality and whatnot, but structurally, we're going to need to do something to continue to protect the public and maintain what it is we're supposed to be doing.
Just to comment on it, the California Human Resources Agency, and basically they just did a big audit and looked across all of the classifications throughout the state organization. And I believe one of those classifications was the enforcement representative. And they felt that it was very limited, and perhaps maybe those individuals would move to the investigator class. But it's just a recommendation sitting out there, and so we've been talking to Nicole Lee, our personnel manager, to see if there's something we can't do to move ahead so that we can compensate our investigators fairly to retain them.
Any further comment? Ms.
Yeah,
Norton?
I piggybacking on what Kevin said and Cindy, yeah, it is a structural problem. It is a salary problem. And I think the objectives should be here is that maybe looking at that as maybe not, if not this year, next year, as really trying to move that in the direction that's favorable to the board. Because you're going to continue to have this issue. Hopefully, Peace Officer Henderson's not going to leave us. Because it is a very important component for you to do what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish. You have the board support, I'm sure, and whatever we can do. Yeah.
Any further comment? Any public comment on this issue? Hearing none, we're being asked for this motion to be accepted here. The Enforcement Committee is being asked to present the following recommendation for the full board, to the full board for approval.
So moved.
Hang on a second, let me read the rest of it. Hang on, you can be the guy.
No.
Provide for peace officer appointment for an applicant that has passed a comprehensive background investigation and completion of the 64-hour Penal Code 832 training. Note, if approved, completion of the 17-week Special Investigator Basic Course or equivalent will no longer be required. Approve appointment of peace officer candidates to complete the minimum training post-approved PC 832 training in lieu of a basic post-academy. Do I have a motion? Pastor?
So moved.
So moved, okay. Is there a second?
Second.
On the question, any comment, questions, further issues? Okay, I have a motion and a second. I believe we need a roll call.
Bob Lamb,
Aye.
Kevin Albanese.
Aye.
Pastor Herrera,
Aye.
Frank Shutter,
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries. With that, I'm going to move to agenda item G. And unless there are any questions, this concludes the Enforcement Committee meeting. Any questions? No? Stand adjourned.